The Secret Millionaires Club. How I infiltrated the society of the chosen. They say the rich live differently. What they don't tell you is that the ultra-rich live in an entirely different universe, one with its own rules, laws, and secrets. I know because I've been there. My name is Alex Morgan, and for 6 months, I was an Alex Morgan, struggling journalist from Brooklyn. I was Alexander Montgomery III, hedge fund wunderkind and newest member of the most exclusive club in America, the Pantheon. This is how I infiltrated their world, discovered their secrets, and barely escaped with my life. Part 1. The Invitation. It started with an envelope. Not email, not text. An actual cream-colored envelope delivered by a man in a suit who vanished before I could ask questions. Inside was a card embossed with a simple gold symbol, a circle containing 5 stars arranged in a pentagon. Below it, in elegant script, "Your presence is requested. Tomorrow, 9 p.m. The Ardent. Bring this card." No RSVP. No explanation. Just a command disguised as an invitation. The Ardent was one of those Manhattan restaurants where reservation lists were as closely guarded as nuclear launch codes. I'd never been inside. Journalists on my salary rarely dined where appetizers cost more than our daily pay. "This has to be delivered to the wrong person," I told my roommate Danny as I flipped the card over, finding nothing but the same symbol embossed on the back. "Or," Danny said, eyes brightening with that look I knew too well, "it's exactly the break you've been waiting for." She wasn't wrong. For 3 years, I'd been investigating New York's invisible power structures, the real decision-makers operating behind closed doors. My editor called it conspiracy theory journalism. I called it following the money. And lately, all my research kept pointing to something called the Pantheon. The Pantheon wasn't mentioned in any business publication. It had no website, no social media presence, just whispers, rumors that the wealthiest individuals in the country, not the Forbes list celebrities, but the true power brokers, gathered regularly to make decisions that shaped our world. "It could be dangerous," I said, though excitement was already building in my chest. Danny scoffed. "Everything worth doing is dangerous. Besides, didn't your last story about city council corruption get literally 0 clicks? Your career could use some danger." "Thanks for the reminder," I said dryly. That night, I did my research. The Ardent's clientele included tech billionaires, hedge fund managers, and old money families whose genealogies were intertwined with America's founding. I needed to blend in, which meant I needed help. I called the one person who could transform me from a scrappy journalist into someone worthy of dining at the Ardent. My cousin Rachel, personal stylist to Manhattan's elite. "This is crazy," she said, after I explained my plan. "But I'm in. Come by my apartment at noon tomorrow. I'll bring options." The next day, Rachel worked her magic. My usual uniform of jeans and wrinkled button-downs was replaced with a tailored Tom Ford suit she'd borrowed from a client. My drugstore watch was swapped for a vintage Rolex, just for the night, Alex. "This is worth more than your annual salary." My hair was trimmed, my nails manicured, my posture corrected. "Now remember," Rachel said, adjusting my tie one last time, "money doesn't try to impress. Real wealth is confident, understated. Speak less than you want to. Never check prices. And for God's sake, don't order anything you can't pronounce." By 8:45 p.m., I was standing outside the Ardent, heart hammering in my chest, questioning every life decision that had led me to this moment. The maitre d' examined my invitation with practiced indifference. "This way, Mr. Montgomery." I blinked, momentarily forgetting the name on my hastily created business cards. Alexander Montgomery III, managing partner, Sequoia Capital Ventures, a totally fictional firm I'd invented. The Ardent's main dining room was everything I'd expected. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, soft jazz, and tables spaced far enough apart for discretion. But the maitre d' didn't stop there. He led me through the kitchen, down a corridor, and to an unmarked elevator where a stone-faced security guard waited. "The gentleman is for upstairs," the maitre d' said, and departed. The guard scanned me with a device that looked like a metal detector wand, then nodded. "Phone." "Excuse me." "Your phone. It stays here." He held out a small lead-lined box. I hesitated, then placed my phone inside. The guard pressed his thumb against a biometric scanner, and the elevator doors opened. 15th floor, he said. They're expecting you. As the elevator ascended, I wondered who they were and why they were expecting me. Someone whose invitation had clearly been delivered by mistake. Too late to turn back now. The elevator opened directly into a room unlike anything I'd ever seen, while the ardent downstairs screamed old money luxury. This space defied categorization. The walls were covered in what looked like shifting digital displays, showing everything from stock tickers to security camera feeds from around the world. The furniture was ultra-modern, all glass and rare woods, yet the floor was ancient stone, possibly Roman. Display cases housed artifacts that belonged to museums. A Fabergé egg, an original Shakespeare folio, what appeared to be a genuine Monet. But it was the people who commanded attention. About 20 individuals occupied the space, engaged in quiet conversation. I recognized some immediately. The CEO of America's largest bank, a tech visionary whose products were in every home, a media mogul whose networks shaped public opinion. Others were unfamiliar, but radiated the unmistakable aura of extreme wealth and power. Alexander Montgomery, announced a voice from behind me. I turned to find a tall, elegant woman with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore a simple black dress adorned only with a small pin, the same 5-star pentagon from my invitation. "I'm Victoria Hargrove," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome to the Pantheon." My journalistic instincts kicked into overdrive. Victoria Hargrove, once the most powerful trader on Wall Street before mysteriously retiring 15 years ago. Rumors placed her net worth north of $50 billion, though she appeared on no wealth lists. "The pleasure is mine," I said, shaking her hand and praying my voice wouldn't betray my nerves. "I must admit," she continued, "we were surprised by your acceptance. Your reputation precedes you." Ice filled my veins. They knew who I was. My cover was blown before I'd even begun. But then she added, "Not many 32-year-olds grow a $100 million fund to $3 billion in 18 months. Your strategies in emerging markets have been interesting." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by confusion. Someone named Alexander Montgomery III actually existed and had accomplished these things? And I was now pretending to be him? "I prefer to fly under the radar," I replied, adopting what I hoped was the casual confidence of someone who made millions before breakfast. Victoria smiled thinly. "As do we all. That's rather the point." She gestured toward the room. "Mingle. Observe. The formal proceedings begin at 10. I nodded and moved into the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. My mind raced. What formal proceedings? And where was the real Alexander Montgomery III? For the next 45 minutes, I engaged in the most stressful small talk of my life, carefully navigating conversations with people who collectively controlled trillions of dollars. I kept my comments vague, asked more questions than I answered, and thanked my liberal arts education for giving me just enough knowledge about everything to avoid immediately exposing myself as a fraud. I learned that the Pantheon met monthly, always in different locations. Membership was by invitation only, required unanimous approval, and was limited to 100 individuals globally. The 5-star symbol represented the 5 original founding families who had established the group in 1919, following the Treaty of Versailles. "We're not Illuminati, if that's what you're thinking," chuckled Harold Chen, a shipping magnate from Singapore. "More like a mutual aid society for those with certain resources and shared concerns." "And what concerns might those be?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Chen's expression shifted subtly. "Balance, Mr. Montgomery. The world requires balance." Before I could press further, a chime sounded. The conversation ceased immediately, and everyone moved toward an adjacent room I hadn't noticed before. Taking a deep breath, I followed. The second room was dominated by a large circular table with exactly 21 seats. Above the table hung a strange apparatus, a geodesic dome of glass and metal that softly hummed. Each seat had a small screen embedded in the table before it. Victoria took the head position and gestured for everyone to sit. I noticed each place had a name projected above it. Finding Alexander Montgomery 3, I took my designated seat, wondering what exactly I had gotten myself into. Before we begin, Victoria announced once everyone was seated, I'd like to acknowledge our newest potential. Alexander Montgomery 3 joins us from Sequoia Capital Ventures. All eyes turned to me. I nodded, attempting to appear honored yet unsurprised. As is tradition, Victoria continued, the potential will observe tonight's consensus, but may not participate. At the conclusion, a vote will determine if Alexander advances to initiate status. Wait, I wasn't even a full member yet? That explained why they hadn't immediately identified me as an imposter. They were still vetting this Montgomery person. Tonight's agenda covers 3 items, Victoria said. First, the Singapore matter. Second, the Federal Reserve appointment. And third, the Artemis Protocol. Let us begin with Singapore. For the next hour, I witnessed something extraordinary. These people, these members of the Pantheon, calmly discussed reshaping the economy of an entire nation. They debated currency values, infrastructure investments, and strategic corporate acquisitions as casually as others might discuss weekend plans. The dome above us occasionally pulsed with light, projecting complex data visualizations. Members interacted with their screens, running simulations and projecting outcomes. It was like watching a war room and a board meeting simultaneously. I struggled to keep my face neutral as I realized what I was witnessing. Not a conspiracy of malevolence, but something perhaps more frightening, the casual exercise of almost unlimited power. The Federal Reserve discussion was briefer. 3 names were proposed for the next chair. After minimal debate, a consensus emerged. I made mental notes of every detail, still unable to believe what I was hearing. Then came the third agenda item, the Artemis Protocol. As you know, Victoria said, her tone shifting, we've been monitoring the situation closely. Our analysts now place probability of severe disruption at 68%, up 12 points since last quarter. Harold Chun frowned. The models are still based on incomplete data. All models are incomplete, Harold, replied a woman I recognized as the former head of the CIA. But the trend line is undeniable. Victoria raised her hand, silencing the debate. The question before us is simple. Do we implement Artemis now, or wait until probability exceeds 75%? A tense silence fell over the room. Whatever this Artemis Protocol was, it clearly made even these powerful people uncomfortable. Perhaps our potential has thoughts on the matter, suggested a man at the far end of the table, his British accent crisp, given his expertise in emerging market instabilities. Every head turned toward me. My mouth went dry. Victoria raised an eyebrow. While unconventional, I'm curious. Alexander, what would you advise? In that moment, I made a crucial decision. Rather than stumble through vague platitudes, I would use this opportunity to learn more. Before offering advice on implementation, I said carefully, I'd need to understand Artemis more thoroughly. The ethical implications alone warrant caution. A murmur ran through the group. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. Prudently stated, the Artemis briefing materials will be provided should you advance to initiate. For now, we'll proceed with the vote. The members entered something into their screens. Victoria studied her own display, then looked up. It appears our potential has impressed. Alexander Montgomery 3, you are now an initiate of the Pantheon. Congratulations. Polite applause followed. I forced a smile, my mind reeling from what I just witnessed. The formal meeting is adjourned, Victoria announced. Dinner will be served in the East Room. Alexander, a moment, please. As the others filed out, Victoria approached me. Initiates are granted certain privileges, she said, removing a small object from her pocket. It was a platinum card embossed with the now familiar 5-star pentagon. This will provide access to our archives and secure communication network. I accepted the card, feeling its substantial weight. Thank you. Additionally, she continued, you'll be assigned a shepherd to guide your integration. She gestured, and a young woman approached, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. Elise Rousseau will be your point of contact, Victoria said. She'll also perform the standard background verification. My pulse quickened. Background verification? Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. Merely a formality. We've already done quite thorough research, but tradition demands completeness. With that, she departed, leaving me alone with Elise. Congratulations, Mr. Montgomery, Elise said, her voice carrying a hint of a French accent. Shall we join the others for dinner? I nodded, mind frantically calculating my next move. I needed to gather more information, document what I'd seen, but my phone was still in that lead-line box downstairs, and now I had this Elise person watching me. Dinner was a blur of fine wine, exquisite food, and conversation that alternated between mundane pleasantries and casual mentions of world-altering decisions. I maintained my cover, but with each passing minute, the weight of my deception grew heavier. By midnight, as the gathering began to disperse, I had formulated a plan. I would retrieve my phone, document everything I could remember, then research this Alexander Montgomery III, and determine how much time I had before my imposture was discovered. Elise approached as I prepared to leave. Your car is waiting, Mr. Montgomery. I'll accompany you to your residence to begin the verification process. Tonight? I asked, unable to hide my surprise. Is that a problem? Her eyes studied me intently. Not at all, I replied, mind racing, though I admit I'm rather tired. The process is brief, she assured me. 2 hours at most. As we descended in the elevator, I frantically tried to think of a way out. My apartment would immediately give me away. No real hedge fund manager lived with a roommate in a walk-up in Brooklyn, and Danny would certainly blow my cover the moment we arrived. The guard returned my phone, which I pocketed without checking. When we reached the street, a black Maybach idled at the curb. After you, Elise said, opening the door. I had no choice. I climbed in, and she followed. Where to, Mr. Montgomery? Asked the driver. Before I could answer, Elise said, The Pierre, please. The Pierre? The luxury hotel on Fifth Avenue. I shot her a questioning look. I took the liberty of booking you a suite, she explained, since your New York accommodations are temporary. Was that a knowing gleam in her eye? I couldn't tell. As the car pulled away from the Ardent, I realized I had just stepped from one deception into something much deeper. The Pantheon was real. Their power was vast. And now I was trapped in an escalating lie that could cost me everything, possibly even my life. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. Part 2, The Descent. The Maybach glided through Manhattan's late-night streets, its interior so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Elise sat beside me, tapping occasionally on a tablet while maintaining an unervingly pleasant smile. So, I ventured, what exactly does this verification process entail? She looked up. Oh, nothing invasive. Biometrics, background confirmation, asset verification. Standard procedure. Biometrics. The word hit like a freight train. No amount of borrowed clothes could fake fingerprints or retinal scans. Sounds thorough, I managed. The Pantheon values security above all else, Mr. Montgomery. I'm sure you understand. I nodded, desperately trying to formulate an escape plan. My mind flashed to action movies where the protagonist jumps from moving vehicles, but this wasn't Hollywood, and I'd probably just get myself killed on Fifth Avenue. You seem tense, Elise observed. Long day, I replied, and I wasn't expecting all this. The invitation often comes unexpectedly, she said, but never without purpose. I seized the opening. About that, how exactly was I selected? I keep a deliberately low profile. Elise's lips curved slightly. Everyone says that. Yet true anonymity is impossible now. Victoria has been monitoring your fund's activities for some time. Your handling of the Brazilian market correction last quarter was particularly impressive. I made a noncommittal sound, mentally cataloging these details about the real Montgomery. Though, she added, studying me, your public photos don't quite capture you accurately. My blood went cold. How so? You're more intense in person. Your dossier suggested someone more reserved. We arrived at the Pierre before I could respond. The doorman knew Elise by name, greeting her with familiar deference as we entered the ornate lobby. The suite was actually a full-floor penthouse with panoramic views of Central Park. Under different circumstances, I might have been awestruck by the luxury. Now, I was just counting exits. "Make yourself comfortable," Elise said, setting her tablet on a glass desk. "I'll prepare the verification station." She disappeared into another room. The moment she was gone, I pulled out my phone, intending to text Danny an SOS. To my horror, the device wouldn't unlock. The screen displayed only the 5-star Pentagon symbol. They'd done something to my phone while it was in that lead line box. Of course they had. I moved to the landline on a side table, but when I lifted the receiver, I heard only a single tone followed by a mechanical voice. "Pantheon secure line. Authentication required." I replaced the receiver and moved to the windows, calculating the drop to the street below. 15 floors, minimum. Not survivable. Looking for escape routes? I spun around. Elise stood in the doorway, her pleasant demeanor unchanged, but something harder now visible in her eyes. "Just admiring the view," I said. "It is spectacular," she agreed, approaching. "Though I should mention, the windows don't open, and the glass is ballistic grade. The elevators require keycard access after midnight, and the stairwells are alarmed. Standard security for our Pantheon properties." She stopped directly in front of me. "So perhaps we should dispense with a charade, Mr. Morgan." The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. "I don't." "Alexander Morgan," she continued, unfazed. 34. Graduated Columbia Journalism School. Currently employed by the Metropolitan Observer, though your more interesting work appears in your Substack newsletter, Behind the Curtain. Specifically, your 12-part series theorizing about, well, us. She knew. She'd always known. Which meant Victoria knew. Which meant I'd been allowed to infiltrate the Pantheon. But why? How long? I asked, abandoning the pretense. "From the beginning," she replied. "The real Alexander Montgomery III is currently in Tokyo, negotiating a rather significant acquisition. He has no idea the Pantheon exists." "Then why the elaborate show? Why let me in?" Elise gestured toward the seating area. "Please sit. This conversation will be more comfortable when you're not planning your escape." Seeing no alternative, I complied. Elise took a seat across from me, crossing her legs elegantly. "The Pantheon," she began, "has existed for over a century. During that time, we've been the subject of countless conspiracy theories, most wildly inaccurate. Occasionally, however, someone gets close enough to the truth to become interesting." "Like me," I said. "Like you," she confirmed. "Your work shows unusual insight. You follow money trails most journalists ignore. You ask questions others don't think to ask." "So tonight was what, a test?" "An audition," she corrected. "Victoria believes you might be useful." "Useful for what?" "The Pantheon operates on accurate information and strategic discretion. Both are increasingly rare commodities. We need individuals who can navigate between worlds, our world and the public one." I leaned forward. "You're recruiting me? To do what, exactly?" "Write propaganda." Elise's expression cooled slightly. "We don't deal in propaganda, Mr. Morgan. We deal in narrative management. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm sitting." "No." She raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, what did you witness tonight that struck you as malevolent? World domination? Bond villain plotting?" I hesitated. "You were discussing manipulating Singapore's economy. We were discussing stabilizing it against an impending currency crisis that would devastate millions of ordinary citizens. A crisis, I might add, created by reckless speculation from non-Pantheon entities." "And the Federal Reserve appointment? Selecting someone competent who won't crash global markets for political gain. Radical concept, I know." Despite my skepticism, her replies were disarmingly reasonable. "And the Artemis Protocol? What's that, some doomsday contingency?" Something flickered across Elise's face. Concern, perhaps. "That's complicated, and not something I'm authorized to discuss with you. Yet." She stood and walked to a bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of what looked like very expensive scotch. Returning, She handed one to me. The Pantheon isn't what you think, Alex. We're not shadowy villains controlling the world from secret lairs. We're pragmatists trying to maintain stability in an increasingly chaotic system. Through unelected, unaccountable power, I countered, as opposed to the paragons of accountability we see in governments worldwide. She sipped her drink. How's that working out? I had no good answer for that, so I tried another angle. Why me? Why not approach me directly instead of this elaborate deception? Would you have believed us? Or would you have assumed it was a trap, a way to silence your investigation? She shook her head. We needed you to see for yourself, to witness the Pantheon in action without filters. I took a drink, buying time to think. The scotch was exceptional, warming my throat and clearing my head somewhat. So what happens now? I asked. What's my alternative to joining you? Disappearing. Elise actually laughed. God, you journalists are all so dramatic. No, Alex. If you decline, you'll be taken home with a memory gap of about 12 hours and a mild hangover. You'll remember attending a boring finance dinner and drinking too much. Nothing more. You can do that. She just smiled. And if I accept, then your real education begins. She set down her glass. The Pantheon isn't just about wealth or power. It's about responsibility, seeing beyond the immediate, planning in decades, not quarters. And all I have to do is sell out my journalistic integrity, I said bitterly. No, she replied, her tone suddenly intense. All you have to do is tell the truth, the whole truth, instead of the convenient, simplified versions that fit into headlines or social media debates. She reached into her jacket and removed a small card identical to the one Victoria had given me earlier. This is real, by the way. It will grant you access to certain Pantheon resources. Take it. Take some time to decide. 3 days. If you want in, use the card. If not, she shrugged. Enjoy your life. I accepted the card reflexively. That's it. You're just letting me walk away with knowledge of your secret society. As I said, if you decline, certain adjustments will be made to ensure discretion. Memory manipulation. The concept was terrifying but explained why the Pantheon had remained hidden for a century. Elise stood. A car will take you wherever you wish to go now. Consider this a gesture of good faith. My journalistic instincts screamed that this was my chance. Gather evidence. Expose the Pantheon. Write the story of a lifetime. But a smaller, quieter voice whispered something else. What if they're not the villains in this story? I have questions, I said, also rising. Dozens of them. I would expect nothing less, she replied. But they'll have to wait until you've made your decision. She extended her hand. It was a pleasure meeting the real Alexander Morgan. I shook her hand, still processing everything. How do I use the card? If I decide to accept? When you're ready, simply hold it and say, Pantheon access allowed. Someone will come for you within the hour. With that, she escorted me to the elevator. As promised, a black SUV waited outside. The driver asked for my destination without comment or curiosity. Brooklyn, I said, giving my address, and I need to make a stop along the way. Dawn was breaking as I let myself into my apartment. Danny was asleep, thankfully. I needed time to think without explaining my borrowed Tom Ford suit or the fact that I'd just been recruited by what was essentially the world's most exclusive club. I'd had the driver stop at a 24-hour pharmacy, where I'd purchased a small safe with a combination lock. Inside it, I now placed a Pantheon access card, a handwritten account of everything I'd witnessed, and a USB drive containing audio recordings I'd secretly made during the dinner using my smartwatch, which, unlike my phone, had remained untampered with. For 3 days, I barely slept. I researched everything I could about the Pantheon's supposed members, creating a massive digital conspiracy board on my laptop. I tracked stock movements, policy decisions, global events, looking for patterns, for evidence of coordination. What I found was inconclusive. Yes, there were connections, coincidences that stretched credulity, but no smoking gun proving malevolent intent. If anything, many of the Pantheon's apparent interventions seemed to have prevented worse outcomes. On the evening of the 3rd day, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the platinum card I'd removed from the safe. Danny was out, giving me privacy for my decision. My journalistic ethics told me to expose the Pantheon, to pull back the curtain on this unprecedented concentration of unaccountable power. But my instincts told me something else, that there was more to learn, that the story was more complex than secret billionaire cabal controls world. And there was that other thing nagging at me, curiosity. What was the Artemis Protocol? Why had it made even these unflappable power brokers nervous? I took a deep breath and held up the card. Pantheon access, I said aloud, feeling slightly ridiculous. Nothing happened immediately. I was about to try again when my phone, which had mysteriously returned to normal function the morning after the ardent, chimed with a text from an unknown number. Balcony door is unlocked. Come up. I lived on the 3rd floor. My apartment didn't have a balcony. Moving to the window, I looked up. On the roof of my building, 6 floors above, I could make out a figure silhouetted against the night sky. Heart pounding, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the stairs. Part 3. The truth. The rooftop door should have been locked and alarmed. Building policy after some teenagers had been caught drinking up their last year. Tonight, it swung open silently at my touch. The night was clear and cool, stars barely visible through New York's light pollution. Standing at the edge of the roof, looking out over Brooklyn, was Elise. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said without turning. Neither was I admitted, approaching cautiously. She turned then, studying me. Have you made your decision? I have questions first. Of course you do. There was a hint of amusement in her voice. Ask. The Artemis Protocol, I said immediately. What is it? Her expression sobered. Direct, aren't you? Artemis is a contingency, a response to a specific threat that the Pantheon has been monitoring for years. What threat? Tell me, Alex, what's the greatest risk to global stability right now? Not the most publicized risk, the real one. I considered my answer carefully. Resource depletion? Climate? Nuclear proliferation? All serious concerns, she acknowledged. But no, the greatest threat is information collapse. Information collapse. The exponential growth of misinformation, coupled with declining trust in institutions and expert authority, leading to a state where consensus reality fractures beyond repair. She gestured toward the city lights. When people can no longer agree on basic facts, democracy fails, markets fail, society fails. I frowned. And Artemis is supposed to fix that. Not fix. Mitigate. Create breathing room for recovery. She sighed. It's a technological solution to a technological problem. Beyond that, I can't elaborate without authorization. Convenient, I muttered. Necessary, she countered. Next question. I decided to shift tactics. Why were you chosen as my, what did Victoria call it? Shepherd. Something like surprise flickered across Elise's face. Interesting choice of question. Is there an answer? I was like you once, she said after a pause. Not a journalist, an academic. Political science. I was researching global power structures when the Pantheon found me. That was 9 years ago. So you're what? Proof that they can turn critics into believers. Her eyes hardened slightly. I'm proof that understanding requires proximity. That things look different from the inside. Or you've been co-opted. Perhaps, she conceded. But consider the alternative explanation, that my perspective changed because I gained access to better information. We stood in silence for a moment, the city humming around us. Final question, I said. What happens if I say yes? What exactly would I be doing for the Pantheon? Initially, learning, observing. Later, if you prove suitable, you'd serve as a bridge, helping shape narratives that allow necessary changes without triggering destabilizing panic or resistance. You want me to be a propagandist? I said flatly. No, we want you to be a translator. Most people can't comprehend the full complexity of global systems, not because they're stupid, but because they have lives to lead, families to care for, immediate concerns that consume their attention. They need simplified versions of the truth. The question is, who creates those simplifications, and to what end? She stepped closer. Right now, that process is chaotic, driven by clickbait economics and tribal signaling. We believe it can be more responsible, with the Pantheon deciding what responsible means. With people like you helping ensure the Pantheon remains ethical in those decisions, she countered. Systems of power have always existed, Alex. They always will. The question isn't how to eliminate them, but how to make them serve humanity's best interests. It was a seductive argument, appealing to both my ego and my idealism, which made me immediately suspicious. I need more time, I said. Elise shook her head. I'm afraid that's not an option. Decision time, Alex. In or out? I looked out at the city, at the millions of lives being lived, each person believing they understood the world they inhabited, none of them aware of the Pantheon's invisible hand shaping that world. If I say no, as I explained, you'll forget this ever happened. Your investigation into the Pantheon will seem suddenly uninteresting to you. You'll move on to other stories. And my evidence? My recordings? My notes? She smiled slightly. What recordings? My blood ran cold. I told no one about the recordings. We have resources you can't imagine, Alex, she said softly. But we're not villains. We're custodians, imperfect ones, certainly, but necessary. I made my decision in that moment, not from fear, but from clarity. Whatever the Pantheon was, whatever they were planning, the world needed to know. I needed to know. I'm in, I said. Relief visibly washed over Elise. Good. Follow me. She led me to a sleek helicopter I hadn't noticed before, its black surface absorbing rather than reflecting light. Within minutes, we were airborne, soaring over Manhattan toward an unknown destination. Where are we going? I shouted over the engine noise. Pantheon Prime, she replied. Our main facility. The helicopter flew north, eventually landing on a private estate in Westchester County. From the air, it had looked like a typical hedge fund manager mansion. Up close, I realized it was much more. Elise led me through security measures that would make the Pentagon jealous, biometric scans, radiation detection, AI behavior analysis. Finally, we descended in an elevator that traveled far deeper than seemed possible for a residential property. The doors opened onto a vast underground complex, humming with activity. Dozens of people worked at advanced computing stations arrayed in concentric circles around a central holographic display, showing what appeared to be a real-time model of global information flows. Welcome to the Artemis Hub, Elise said. I stared, stunned by the scale and sophistication. This is not what I expected. Few things about the Pantheon are what outsiders expect, she replied, guiding me forward. At the center of the room stood Victoria Hargrove, conversing with several people in lab coats. She looked up as we approached. Ah, Mr. Morgan, you've made the right choice, Victoria said, her eyes assessing me with calculating precision, though I suspect your motives aren't entirely aligned with ours yet. I didn't bother denying it. Transparency seems like a good place to start our relationship. Victoria's lips curved slightly. Indeed. Follow me. She led us past the bustling command center to a separate chamber dominated by a circular table reminiscent of the one at the Ardent. The difference was the massive display occupying its center, a three-dimensional visualization of interconnected nodes pulsing with light. This, Victoria said, is Artemis. I stared at the display. It's a network. It's the network, she corrected. A real-time map of global information flow, showing how narratives form, evolve, and spread. We've been mapping it for decades. One of the scientists stepped forward. The colored nodes represent information clusters, news outlets, social media platforms, influential individuals. The connections between them show transmission pathways. The brightness indicates velocity and impact. I watched mesmerized as pulses of light traveled through the network, some dying out quickly, others growing brighter and triggering cascading reactions. You're tracking memes? I asked, using the original definition of the word, ideas that spread like viruses. We're tracking reality fragmentation, Victoria said. Watch this sector. She gestured, and the scientist zoomed in on a portion of the model where angry red nodes were multiplying rapidly, sending out tendrils that corrupted neighboring clusters. This represents a coordinated disinformation campaign that began 3 days ago. By tomorrow, it will have sufficient momentum to create measurable real-world consequences: market volatility, civil unrest, policy paralysis. I frowned. You can predict this with that much precision? After 40 years of data, yes, Victoria replied. Human behavior en masse is surprisingly predictable. The problem is intervention. Traditional methods, fact-checking, counter-narratives, platform moderation, they're all too slow, too weak, too easily countered. Which brings us to Artemis, Elise added. Victoria nodded. The Artemis Protocol isn't about controlling information, Alex. It's about creating resilience within the information ecosystem, a kind of immune system for truth. I crossed my arms. That sounds dangerously close to deciding what truth is. Not at all, the scientist interjected. Artemis doesn't judge content. It evaluates integrity. Does information come from verifiable sources? Is it internally consistent? Does it acknowledge complexity and uncertainty? These are measurable qualities independent of ideology or perspective. Victoria touched the display, and the model shifted to show a different configuration. Artemis has been running in passive mode for 3 years. It's learned to identify information pathogens before they become symptomatic. The next phase would allow it to deploy antibodies. Meaning what exactly? I asked. Targeted reinforcement of epistemological infrastructure, Victoria said. Elevating context where it's missing. Creating connection where there's isolation. Introducing complexity where there's harmful oversimplification. I shook my head. You're talking about manipulating the global information space. Playing God with what people believe. We're talking about treating a disease, Victoria countered, her voice hardening. The information environment is critically ill, Mr. Morgan. The disease is terminal if left untreated. Artemis is aggressive therapy, yes, but the alternative is complete epistemic collapse within a decade. I stared at the pulsing network. And you think the cure won't be worse than the disease? That this power won't be abused? That, Elise said quietly, is precisely why you're here. Victoria nodded. The Pantheon has wealth and expertise, but we lack something essential: legitimate connection to the public we're trying to protect. We need voices who understand both worlds, our analytical reality and the lived experience of ordinary people. Watchdogs, I said, understanding dawning. Equals, Victoria corrected. Partners with the authority to ensure Artemis serves humanity, not just the Pantheon's interests. I laughed incredulously. And you picked a journalist with a tiny following who was actively investigating you? Victoria's expression was deadly serious. We picked someone who demonstrated both the intelligence to understand the problem and the moral courage to challenge power, even our power. The implications were dizzying. I turned away, pacing the edge of the room as my mind raced. Everything in my journalistic training screamed that this was wrong. A small group making decisions that would affect billions without their knowledge or consent. Yet the rational part of me recognized the impossible challenge. How do you solve a collective problem when the very mechanisms of collective action have been compromised? I turned back to Victoria. I want complete access. No restrictions, no compartmentalization. I need to understand every aspect of Artemis before it's deployed. Granted, she said without hesitation. And I want veto authority. If I believe Artemis crosses an ethical line, I can stop it. Victoria exchanged glances with Elise. That's unprecedented. So is Artemis, I countered. Those are my terms. After a tense moment, Victoria nodded. Acceptable, with one condition. Your veto triggers an emergency conclave of all Pantheon members, where you must defend your position. If you can convince even a third of them, Artemis remains inactive. It wasn't perfect, but it was a genuine check on power, more than I'd expected. Deal. Welcome to the Pantheon, Alex Morgan, Victoria said, extending her hand. The real one this time. As we shook hands, I felt the weight of what I'd agreed to. I wasn't just joining a secret society. I was accepting responsibility for potentially the most important technological intervention in human history. When do we start? I asked. You already have, Elise said, handing me a sleek tablet. Your credentials are active. Your first briefing begins in 1 hour. I suggest you use that time to send a message to your roommate explaining your sudden absence. How long will I be gone? Victoria's expression was grim. That depends entirely on how quickly you learn. The window for effective intervention is closing. We have weeks, not months. As Elise led me to my new quarters, I thought about the path that had brought me here. I'd set out to expose a conspiracy of the powerful, only to find myself joining it, albeit with a different mission than I'd imagined. Was I compromising my principles, or evolving them to meet an unprecedented challenge? Was the Pantheon humanity's salvation, or its ultimate threat? Was I a watchdog or a collaborator? I didn't know, but I was certain of one thing. The world was about to change, and I was now at the center of that change. All I could do was ensure it changed for the better. The next morning, as I began reviewing the Artemis specifications with a team of engineers, my phone buzzed with a news alert. A major social media platform was experiencing what they called technical difficulties, though users were reporting strange patterns in their feeds. A sudden prevalence of nuanced, contextual information replacing the usual outrage-inducing content. I looked up to find Elise watching me from the doorway. It started, hasn't it? I asked, holding up my phone. She nodded. A limited test deployment. Authorized last week. Before I joined, I noted. Before my supposed veto power. Consider it your first challenge as watchdog, she replied evenly. Investigate. Evaluate. Judge. That's why you're here, Alex. As she walked away, I turned back to the Artemis specifications with renewed determination. The game had changed, but so had my position in it. I was no longer an outsider looking in, but an insider with the power to effect change. Whether that made me a hero or a villain in this story remained to be seen. Perhaps I was both, or neither. Perhaps those categories, like so many others in our fractured information landscape, had become hopelessly inadequate for describing the complex reality we now inhabited. What I knew for certain was that the story of the Pantheon, of Artemis, of our collective future, was still being written, and now I was one of its authors. The end. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible content.